Over the last several months, perhaps no issue has generated more conversation and controversy than that of people who identify as transgender. This is a difficult and emotional issue for many. No matter what side of this issue one personally falls on, however, what is clear is this. At Anne Arundel County Public Schools, our charge is to fully support every student in their pursuit of reaching their full potential. We owe students who identify as transgender the same levels of support as we do gay students, poor students, rich students, special education students, ELL students, or any other group of students. Simply put, in a school system that aims to elevate all students and eliminate all gaps, all must mean all, no exceptions. What you are about to view is a training session conducted in June that covers the latest guidance and legal opinions regarding this matter. Clearly, this is an evolving issue, and the guidance from the courts or elsewhere may change in the coming months or years. We will do everything we can to convey any such changes to you in a timely manner so that you can best support our students. Meanwhile, please listen carefully to what you are about to hear. A formal set of guidelines will be provided to principals and department heads to distribute as needed. If you have general questions, please contact the Office of Student Services. If you have specific legal questions on a particular case, please contact the Office of Legal Services. To set the stage for this discussion, first take a look at two videos, one from the mother of a transgender student and the second from one of our own students. I do want to let you know that there is a religious reference in the first video. We chose to leave it in, not because we are taking any stance on the particular point. We aren't. But because it is a crucial part of this mom's story. Thank you, and thank you for what you do for all of our children every day.
I'm the mom of a little girl called AJ, who was recently profiled in the Kansas City Star. As surprised as I was to find my family in the paper, I'm also incredibly proud. My daughter is 6 years old. She transitioned, which means she changed her outward appearance from male to female and started living full-time as her true gender when she was 4. Until that point, she was quite a rough and tumble little boy with a buzz cut and a shark tooth necklace. But when she was 3, she asked her dad and I if we could buy her a princess dress. We didn't buy the dress. We thought she might be going through a stage of liking bright or sparkly things and didn't want to waste money on something she would grow bored of in a week. But she kept asking, and I found out that she had a favorite princess dress she wore at daycare. What the heck, we thought, and we took her to the store to pick one out. Things didn't stop there. Over the next few months, she started to wear that dress every single minute that she was at home. And then she asked for more. Dresses, nightgowns, headbands, sparkly pink shoes, and eventually even girls' underwear. We allowed some of those things, but we drew the line at the undies. There were just some things we weren't comfortable with during this phase. But then I noticed her pushing down on her genitals a lot, and I asked her what was wrong. Not having those parts, I assumed she might have a rash and was itchy, but her answer shocked me. She said that they bothered her and were in the way. She wanted them gone. Thank God for Google, because I immediately jumped on the computer and typed in a search. 4-year-old boy says genitals should be gone. What came back was a very short list of results, but they all pointed to one thing. My child might be transgender. I had never even heard the word transgender before and really didn't know what to think. We made an appointment with our pediatrician. She recommended a child psychologist. But before we could even get an appointment, my daughter, then my 4-year-old son, said these words to me. Mom, you know I'm really a girl, right? I'm a girl on the inside. That moment changed my life. In the following months, she became more insistent. We saw the psychologist and an endocrinologist to make sure there wasn't a hidden medical issue. She became more determined to express herself by wearing those pink sparkly shoes to daycare. She wanted to go out for ice cream in a fairy dress and wings. Eventually, we couldn't hold her back. She was showing signs of depression and refused to leave the house dressed as a boy. The day I let her go to school in girl clothes, she was happier than I had seen in a very long time. The kids were great, and the teachers were awesome. But then the kids went home and told their parents, and they weren't so great after that. Adult bigotry had influenced them. We lost most of our friends and some of our family. We basically went into hiding for about a year while my daughter grew out her hair to look like the girl that she is. When we emerged again, it was with a very happy and confident daughter. When I tell our daughter's story, I hear the same uninformed comments over and over again, so I'd like to address a few of those now. 1, we are liberals pushing a gay agenda. Nope, sorry, I'm a conservative Southern Baptist Republican from Alabama. 2, we, or at least I, because they always blame the mom, wanted a girl, so we turned our child into one. Again, no, I desperately wanted boys. The idea of raising a girl in today's world scares me to death. I'd much rather be responsible for raising a good boy who knows how to treat girls well than to be responsible for raising a girl who might only be interested in dating bad boys. 3, kids have no idea what they want or who they are. My kid wants to be a dog. Should I let him? That's up to you, but I wouldn't. There's a profound difference between wanting to be something in imaginary play and in declaring who you are insistently, consistently, and persistently. Those are the 3 markers that set transgender children apart, and my daughter displayed all of them. 4, kids shouldn't have to learn about sex at such a young age. Well, I agree, so it's a good thing that being transgender has nothing to do with sex. Gender identity is strictly how a person views him or herself on the inside, and it is completely separate from who we are attracted to. 5, transgender people are perverts and shouldn't be in the bathroom with normal people. I don't know what you go into a bathroom to do, but I know what my daughter goes in there for, and it isn't to look around. It's to go into a stall, lock the door, and pee where no one else can see her. Number 6, God hates transgender people. They are sinners and going to hell. My God taught us to love one another. Jesus sought out those who others rejected. Some people choose to embrace biblical verses that appear to say transgender people are being wrong. I choose to focus on verses like 1 Samuel 16:7, which says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him.' The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." My daughter is a girl in her heart. She knows it. God knows it. And that's good enough for me.
Hello, my name is Matthew Nolte, and I am a 16-year-old boy. I attend Old Mill High School, and I am currently in the 11th grade. Among the many things that I identify as a transgender man. This year has been particularly difficult for me, though. I no longer live with my mother, as I consider our relationship emotionally harmful to me. Now that I live with my father full-time, I attend Old Mill. Even though I have found my first year at Old Mill to be quite wonderful, a few things have been holding me back from my happiness. The main one being my birth name. Because of this fact that my mother still has primary custody over me, I am not yet able to legally change my name. When I am at school, this name that was assigned to me at birth follows me everywhere, from my grades, which I am quite proud of, to the attendance list that is called out every day. I feel that I can no longer bear hearing this name every day, so I have come to you with a proposal. I propose that a preferred name box be added to the student file that overrides the legal name on simple school documents, such as grade sheets, report cards, Office 365, Parent Connect, Teacher Roll, etc. This box would only be used in special circumstances such as my own. Doing this would prevent me, as well as many other transgender students, from experiencing gender dysphoria, which, by definition, is a state of unease or generalized dissatisfaction with life, specifically relating to one's gender. It is common for me to feel gender dysphoria when I am reminded of the parts of my past or present that I do not identify with. I truly hope that you will take my proposal into consideration, as it would alleviate my emotional pain that I feel in school, as well as the emotional pain that many other transgender students feel every day. Thank you.
So a difficult and complex issue with a whole lot of tentacles to it. Whether it's Matthew Nolte or it's Debbie Jackson, you can see very clearly that this pervades all levels of our school system. If you're working at a summer camp, you're teaching in a class, you're chaperoning on a field trip, you're going to encounter this sooner or later. I've seen these videos a number of times now, and there's one part of the first one that sticks out to me, and it's Debbie Jackson, and when she says, "And then the kids went home and told their parents, and they weren't so great after that." We have transgender students at every level of our school system right now. You've not heard anything about them because we've tried to support them and their families as best we can. And our kids get it. The adults on the outside sometimes don't get it, but the kids get it. So the guidelines that we've worked on, which are an evolving thing because it seems like every week or month we've got another court ruling or court case that modifies something, are what we're going to go over now. They're based from a counseling and support point of view, and they're based on a legal point of view. We'll start with the legal stuff, and Laurie will go over that.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Pritchard. I'm the head of the legal department for the school system. So I'm going to try and give you a brief legal overview without trying to get too legalese and boring, because sometimes people seem to nod off a little bit with this. So what we have, Title IX, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that term. There's been a lot of news lately. It's been on the news stations and the papers about transgender issues. And Title IX deals with that as well as discrimination against all types of protected classes. And Anne Arundel County, and it's not just limited to athletics, it can apply to whether you're segregated in a particular class, whether you have access to a program, whether you're being harassed or bullied based upon your sex, based upon your being a member of a protected class. So if we can go to the next. Anne Arundel County Public Schools, I'm sure a number of you are familiar. If you're not, we have board policies and regulations. They're available. You can look at them on the Anne Arundel County Public website. And we have one in particular that talks about non-discrimination. And if you take a look at that, it talks about discrimination based on what we traditionally think. It might be national origin, it might be race, it might be religion, it might be marital status. It also applies to your sex, female, male, sexual orientation. Do you identify as a male or a female? Gender identity, physical attributes of students. And we apply these same provisions to whether it might be students or whether it may be employees in the school system. So it's an important regulation, and we've done training on that, and that applies in school, it applies on field trips, it applies at summer camps, it applies anywhere where we may be in contact with students or staff. Now, in terms of White House guidance on this particular matter, and we can give a little history, and we have some different slides on that, but recently the federal government has issued guidance, and that applies to all school systems that receive any federal funding, and of course we're one of those systems. And then it says that, and this guidance resulted from a lot of the legal cases, and we'll talk about one in particular. The state of Maryland is located in what's called the Fourth Circuit. And the Court of Appeals for that circuit is located down in Richmond, Virginia. The White House said that students must be treated consistent with their gender identity. So what does that mean, and how did we get to this White House guidance? So in 2014, there was a case filed in the state of Virginia in Gloucester County. The student's name was Gavin Grimm. He was born a girl as a female. By about the age of 6, he started to identify as a male. Started to wear girls' dresses, told his parents that he no longer viewed himself as a male. This continued throughout school and really came to a head when he went to high school. The first year of high school, he really struggled. He was under the treatment of a psychologist for gender identity type issues and was homeschooled. He then decided that he wanted to matriculate into a regular high school and be part of that. And that's when the issues at the high school started, because he came dressed as a male, identified as a male, and said, I want to use the male restrooms. The school worked somewhat with the family initially, and then they came up with a plan that you can use the restroom in the nurse's room. It's a private restroom. So for a period of time, the student agreed to do that. And then the student told the school, I don't want to do that any longer. I want to be able to go to the male restroom. And that's really when the issue came to a head for the school system, because the school fought against that. Parents were up in arms, and ultimately the school system in December of 2015 issued a decision saying you are not allowed to use the male restrooms. We have a private restroom for you. We're in the process of building or constructing 3 separate restrooms where you could use one of those. And the student said, that's just not acceptable to me. So the following day after the school board issued that decision, they told the student, if you're going to use the male restroom and you're caught doing that, you're going to be disciplined and potentially put out of school. The student then had legal counsel and they filed suit down in the court there. Ultimately, as that case wound its way through, and there's a lot of legal motions and arguments, under Title IX, under anti-discrimination provisions, under equal protection. But ultimately, the court there sided with the school system and said, or sided with the student and said, yes, you're going to be able to use the male restroom. The school system said, we don't agree with that. In the meantime, in the last couple months, there's been a lot of issues going on with it. That's the closest appellate court located to Washington, D.C. So once that case was decided by the Court of Appeals down the Fourth Circuit, the federal government then became involved, and President Obama's issued a proclamation or a letter of guidance saying, no, every student that identifies as a female is going to be able to use the female restroom, the female locker room, and be treated as a female. Same thing, vice versa, for males. The school system, as of today, has filed with the court down there saying we intend to appeal to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court of the land. And as a result of that, that decision is currently what's called stayed right now. So it can't be put into effect. There are also 11 states right now that have filed suit against the federal government. So it's extremely likely that the Supreme Court is definitely going to take this case because it's a huge issue that has impact across the country. So for us, what does that mean? I mean, it means restrooms, it means locker rooms, it means field trips when we have students that are going on field trips and overnight trips in particular, which a lot of you may be involved in. What are we going to do with them? So here in the school system, we've been working on this issue for months and months before any of this guidance came out from the federal government. And we'd also received guidance from the state of Maryland basically saying, we think any student that identifies as a female should be treated as a female. Any student that identifies as a male should be treated as a male, regardless of what their sex was at birth. So we have been working on some internal guidelines which have not been published yet because everything keeps changing. As you can see, as of today, now we're getting additional information. But we have our position has been, we think students should be treated fairly. And if you're identifying as a female, you should be treated as a female. If you're identifying as a male, you should be treated as a male. And it's really, our students, we've dealt with a number of cases in schools, and we've been very successful in working with the parents and with the students. And we really haven't had any major challenges because we think we're treating students the way everyone wants to be treated. So what is that going to mean moving forward? We will have some formal guidelines eventually issued in the case, but what we need to do is work with the students, work with the families, and treat everyone based upon how they're identifying on their gender.
So that's the legal piece of it. The more complex piece of it, really, I think, is the human piece of it. And so Shirley and Lucia will talk about some of the ways we've put guidelines into place there.
Okay, so as Lori said, we've been working on this particular challenge for a number of months. We had a committee that convened last school year that included students, school staff, administrators, our PE and health people, our lawyers, you name it. It was a committee of thousands. And we based our guidelines on the idea that all children, all students, all adults should be treated with respect, with equal respect, no matter what, no matter what. If we treat all people the way that we want to be treated, then we'll all do just fine. However, there are some thorny issues that we had to kind of work through, and the legal cases provided us with some guidance for that.
And so Bob and Lori really framed our expectations for, if you can go back one slide, really outlined the expectations for school staff, and that's human rights, inclusiveness, respect, and support, and protecting our youth must be a top priority. Okay, so if we're going to be following the AACPS regulations and guidelines for bullying and for anti-discrimination, if you see something, address it or report it to someone.
Right. So right about the time that we started working on our guidelines, MSDE came out with a set of guidelines, providing safe spaces for transgender and gender non-conforming youth. And lo and behold, when their guidelines came out, we took a look at what we had been working on, and guess what?
Yep.
They were basically the same. So I think, you know, that kind of highlights the fact that if you do what you think is right, you're going to be just fine in terms of legal and people kind of issues.
And the handout that you received today is from the U.S. Department of Justice, and that talks about the compliance with the Title IX regulations.
Right. Did you know that there's such a thing as a Dear Colleague letter? I just learned this when I got Title IX training recently. And apparently, Dear Colleague letters are often where guidance is provided to institutions around legal issues. So this Dear Colleague letter that you have in your hand is what's been all over the news recently. You've heard a lot about it. So now you have it in your hands, the real live deal. So some of the things that we have really been thinking about, and let me just say, we started thinking about kind of formalizing our processes because we were having so many questions from schools about how to handle particular things. And some of the things that we were getting a lot of questions were this issue of what will we call our students, right? So, you know, last year this student was Susie, and this year they've come into school and they've asked teachers to call them Matthew or John or whatever it is. So can we do that? Well, the answer to that is we absolutely should call students and staff by the name that they prefer. Absolutely. Why not? Doesn't cost us anything. The issue that Matthew talked about in that video is a little trickier because it has to do with the legal name. And our records do have to have the student's legal name on them and legal gender until there is a legal change. I believe it won't be too many years, maybe not even years, months, before the guidance on that changes as well. Who knows? It seems to me like it's just all these balls in the air. But in terms of gender, if a student comes to you and asks to be called by a different gender, I'd prefer to be called him or her, and you know, do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, right? In fact, some of the conferences that we've been to lately have suggested that, you know, if you can just call a person by their name instead of referring to them by a pronoun, then it kind of resolves the issue to start with, right? And I don't know about you, but when I was working in schools instead of here, I always felt like it was a marker of respect to be able to call a student by their name. So something to think about. Hopefully our young people will be patient with us as we are used to calling them by one pronoun and slip up sometimes. That it's not malicious, it really is just getting used to it. In terms of disclosing information about whether a child is transgender or LGBT or whatever is private information. And in the student record, it is also private information. So if you have access to that information, it's not to be shared outside of where you would normally share information, right? So you may or may not know that a student that you're working with is identifying as a transgender student of a different gender.
And the way that's spelled out in your guidelines, the staff members should have a legitimate educational interest in the information. So it really is on a need-to-know basis.
Right.
Okay, so it does constitute confidential and in some cases medical information.
Right. I will tell you that from stories that I hear from schools, seems like students are not reluctant to share information with adults or friends who they feel comfortable with. We just have to be thoughtful about who we share that information with. In terms of restroom use, as you heard Laurie say, I'll bet, who knows? You know, right now our guidelines offer students a choice of a private restroom or the restroom that with the gender with which they identify. So for right now, that's what we're saying. You know, it makes sense to me. If I'm a boy, I use the boys' restroom. Although I have to tell you, one of my colleagues said to me, if you've ever been into an elementary school boys' restroom, I can't imagine somebody wanting to use that who didn't really want to use it. So I'm just saying. Same rule with locker rooms. I know when I talked with some of the student leadership, the CRASC students in December about this, there were some folks who were concerned about people saying, oh, I'm a boy, you know, or oh, I'm a girl, just so they could go into a locker room. I can't imagine somebody wanting to put themselves in that position just to be able to go in the other locker room. Same thing with field trips. So that's kind of where some of you where you do come in actually, is with your summer camps. You'll have situations that the facilitators, the heads of your camps, are thinking about already, about how to manage things like where people sleep and how do we group people and that kind of thing. So, but it's helpful for you to be thinking about it too, and to think about, how do I really feel about this? And how is that going to translate into how I'm treating young people?
And it's important to offer kids options because they're not required to use that bathroom. And so if there is a single sex or something, you can offer that as an option. But really, they have the right to have access to the bathroom that matches their gender identity.
Right.
So thank you. Just one other thing on the field trip issue. So many of you might be asking yourselves, so I'm at an overnight field trip and I have a student who's biologically a male, identifies as a female, and we've worked with that student and her family, and that student wants to sleep in the dorms or whatever sleeping arrangements are with the females. They don't want to sleep in a room by themselves. They want to sleep with the rest of the females. So what do we do? And the answer is they sleep with the females. That's not the easy answer, it's the right answer. And in some cases it's going to cause issues because, as Lucia just said, the private information piece doesn't allow you to share that with parents of all of the other campers, right? So that's difficult. Just last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, late last month I guess, the Attorney General weighed in on this and said local school boards should comply with the recent White House directive because failure to comply places them at a risk for Title IX and because the suggestions are not significantly different from MSDs. We've been following both. The White House directive and the MSD, the White House directive changed absolutely nothing for us in terms of the way we've been operating all school year. Some things from a communication standpoint, because we've gotten questions from reporters about this, and we've gotten questions from parents about it. And here's what I've said, and you can feel free to adapt it as you wish. But if we're serious about elevating all students and eliminating all gaps, then all means all, right? All doesn't mean all except whatever group I choose to create, right? And if we're serious about not differentiating these kids and those kids, then we can't arbitrarily, subconsciously, whatever, inadvertently create those kids, right? We can't do it. That's difficult, and it challenges some of our ways of thinking. But the fact is that once we walk through an AACPS door, we're AACPS employees carrying out AACPS missions and objectives, and that's what we have to do for our kids. You want to talk about personal and professional stuff?
Yes, I know Bob just said it. It's a thorny issue to kind of wrestle with, and there are things that we've been taught and values that are family values or perhaps our religious values or the ethics that we've been taught that may seem to conflict. But I know that people who go into the work of working with young people work with young people because they care about working with young people. If they didn't, why would you do that all the time, right? So what's important to keep in mind is that professionally, we have to do what's in the best interest of kids. And what we know from research and from personal reports is that what's in the best interest of students who identify as transgender is to be accepted and treated as the gender with which they identify. I can't imagine what it would be like to wake up in the morning and think, oh, I'm a male really, and what would that be like to be inside a body that felt completely wrong to you and to have people treat you like something you weren't? I can't imagine what that would be like. And I know that myself, when I'm thinking about how to address those moral value conflicts, I think to myself, what would that be like? And it helps me kind of be more professional in my approach to it.
We really want to avoid making any personal judgments about students or their lifestyle, and we really want to stay in compliance with our Title IX regulations.
Right.
So we've talked about bathrooms and sleeping arrangements, and then the next logical question is, what about other students, right?
Right.
So a biological male identifies as a female and gets a change in the female locker room. So what about my daughter who has an objection? What happens? So I have the right on my daughter's behalf, or my daughter has the right to request someplace else to change.
Right.
Now that will bring about some controversy because somebody will say, maybe a lot of people will say, why should we move a class of 24 kids to accommodate one kid, right? But the legal guidance, and frankly our moral and ethical guidance says we're going to support all our kids. And so we have to support them all differently. And we'll take those cases as they come. As I will tell you, I don't think we've had one of those cases this year. I don't think we've had that request anywhere.
So if you can think in terms of, this is not about giving transgender students special treatment. This is just ensuring that they are not treated differently, okay? Ensuring their access.
Right.
So we talked about names, groupings of students. You want to talk about groupings of students?
Yeah, because for you and your summer camps, this becomes something to think about. It's a challenge, and I know that the PE folks have already talked about how to group kids differently than by male and female. And I don't know about you, but when I'm grouping up kids, sometimes male and female seems like a real easy way to sort them. But suppose I'm that child who identifies as the other gender. Which line do I go into? And I'll tell you that this year we've had that be the way that principals or counselors have found out about some of our students because the teacher had the kids line up by gender. So you want to consider other ways to line them up. And if you've worked camp before, you've lined kids up in all the different ways in the world. Line up if you have on red, or line up if your birthday's in January, or line up if you're 12, line up if you're 13. So when we group kids, we need to be very thoughtful about that.
So we talked a little bit about student privacy. What we've said to schools is this. We work with the families of these students, and generally the families say to us, here's who we would like to know, right? The counselor, the principal, the assistant principal, the whatever. So what we've said to schools is, if you need to know, if you're in that group, then you know. You already know, we've told you. If you don't know, don't ask, because asking is going to open you up to a privacy issue. Okay? And then finally, this really needs to be our guide, I think. We have legal, moral, and ethical responsibilities to support all of our kids. This is not an easy road. I mean, you've seen it blow up all over the country. It's going to continue to happen because folks are going to do things that probably aren't in the best interest of all of their kids. We have, very fortunately, escaped any of that thus far, and hopefully that will continue. So with that, we'll stop, and I can't imagine there aren't questions, so we will take those. Who's got questions? Somebody, or we'll shut the door and keep you here till 6:30. Right? Let me do this because we're taping.
So you said that you didn't think that there would ever be students who would say, I'm a girl, and then you see them. Now this is for high school students. I teach elementary. I can't see this being an issue ever. But then you see him like making out with his girlfriend over at the football field, and then he comes back and says, I'm a girl. And then the next day he's a boy, and he keeps switching so that what happens if they keep doing that? Do you continue to support that?
We would not support that. I mean, we're not going to tolerate, I mean, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. If kids, let's assume it's a boy that wants to go into the girls' locker room, and he says, now I'm going to identify as a girl. And then tomorrow, to take your example, we see him making out with his girlfriend, and we know that's been his girlfriend. He's taken her to the dance or to the prom or to homecoming, or he's around and about with her. Then administrators are going to consult with counseling, and then we're going to deal with those kids and have a conversation with those students and parents. This is not going to be a game to go back and forth in locker rooms.
Not to say that they can't change their mind, because if
Correct.
they've had a girlfriend in the past, I know a boy who became a girl who had girlfriends all through high school, but then decided he was a woman.
And that's
he really was a woman.
And that certainly can change, but we're going to we'll deal with those. If that's going on, administrators are going to know, and they're going to work with central office and their supervisors so that we, respect that student and work with that student, but making sure that other students' rights aren't impacted by that also.
So Debbie Jackson said something really important in her video. 3 characteristics: insistently, consistently, and persistently. So when Johnny comes to school on a Thursday and is a boy and wants to be a girl on a Friday, that's a different issue.
I will tell you that, you never thought when you went to school to be a school counselor all those many years ago that that you were going to learn a lot about transgender students. But I've learned a lot this year about gender identity and gender questioning and gender fluid, and the students who are in the room probably would tell you that there are an awful lot of kids who see themselves as gender fluid. So, I do see myself, some days I see myself as more my female side, and sometimes I see myself as more my male side. And we know that for growing up, it's about figuring out who you are. And so I wouldn't be a bit surprised if just a few years down the road, questions about restrooms and locker rooms will be gone, because we'll have structured things that everybody can just use whatever they want to. I lived in Japan, and out in the public restrooms were all gender neutral. If you go to Europe, it's that way too. So that's a great question, though.
Thank you.
And I will tell you that of all the things that worried the students that I talked to, that was the one they were most concerned about. And I just said, can you see some teenage boy subjecting himself to the ridicule of his friends just to be able to go in the girls' locker room?
I think it's a really cool job.
Yeah. You may be right.
I have a teenager, not that he would do that.
So in regards to construction of the new school at Serena Park High School, do you think that will be gender neutral bathrooms? Is that going to happen in the new schools that are being built?
I don't know.
I can take a shot at that. I don't think that since Severna Park was under construction, the plans were all laid out several years ago, that we have that in there as it's being constructed now. But it's something that we're going to have to consider for all of our schools.
Right.
I don't think there's any question about that.
And I will tell you that the administrators who were on our committee with us, you could see the wheels kind of turning in their heads as they were trying to figure out how to address having restrooms that anybody could use, you know, so.
In cases of medical emergencies, like for our camps, we're overnight, and we're significantly far away from parents. And so me personally, I've had to take 3 students to the emergency room.
Right.
And then you get into that personal information and insurance and stuff. And Bob had said we're on a needs-to-know basis. So let's say the student I just happen to be taking to the emergency room, I don't know the gender they're identifying. You're trying to get what I'm getting at, but then that becomes an issue that the emergency room staff needs to know, or something like that. Where does that, like, if I were, where do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Yes, I do.
As the facilitator for the camp, does that give me the needs to know permission to let that know? Do you hear it? That's what I'm saying right now.
If you're the facilitator for the camp, you should know that information, and that'll be provided to you, because clearly you're right. If you had to take a student to the emergency room or get medical care, that's going to be an issue clearly that's going to arise. I mean, for example, you know, if the doctor looks at the student and thinks maybe that's Janie, but he's really Johnny, it's already a traumatic situation potentially for the student. So you'd want to say to the doctor, oh, this is Johnny. Right, so that the student feels as comfortable as possible. So clearly anyone that's in charge of students like that or is involved in medical care or an emergency is going to be advised of what the student's status is.
Right. Other questions?
One issue that may come up, and is when we talk about overnight field trips. So let's assume there's, you know, three girls in a room, and then there's Johnny, who identifies as Jane, comes to the room. And then one student's upset. What do? We're going to have to make arrangements if that student wants an alternative arrangement who's uncomfortable to accommodate that student. And that's going to look different depending on where you are, right? Do you have separate cabins? Is there another area where the student could stay? So facilitators are going to be advised of that, and we're going to have some processes in place to work if students are uncomfortable. It's more the parents that are uncomfortable most of the time than it is the students. So you need to be prepared. We're going to have some processes in place too. If parents call up and say, what the heck, my student just called me and said, you know, there's a boy staying in his room, and we're going to have to be prepared to say, you know, students have rights. We're required to follow the law with those students. You know, that's about the most I can say to you, but we can certainly work with your child for an alternative arrangement if they would like to stay somewhere else or they don't feel comfortable. Because we want to make sure that, you know, that everyone's able to participate and to access camps in our county and to have the same rights as other students.
It becomes a little tricky because you don't want to be in the position of having that child isolated by virtue of everybody leaving the room. So you really want to think ahead of time how you want to handle that situation. Do you move another child in? You know, do you flip-flop? How do you handle that?
Or it might be students from the same school who already know what the student's gender identity is and who are perfectly comfortable with that student. So that's going to depend on what type of camp we're talking about.
Anybody else? Other questions? Let me just close by saying this, that we have 80,000 great kids in our school system, and we have 10,000 great employees, and you are among them, and I thank you very much for what you do. If you have one-on-one questions you want to ask, we're happy to try to answer them as you guys get going. So thank you all for being here.